Welcome to this introduction to BPI's Healthy Home Evaluator certification, which we think is a market opportunity for home performance contractors in Vermont. This is a BPI certification much like the rest of them. It kind of piggybacks. You have to have your energy analyst certification first or some equivalent. And like the other BPI certifications, you can take the test with or without taking a preparatory class. At this time, Efficiency Vermont is trying to promote the idea of healthy home evaluations. We're working with some local hospitals to identify good candidates for evaluations. We're working with the low-income weatherization agencies in Vermont and conducting a pilot to also identify folks who may be good candidates to have someone come in their home and evaluate how healthy their house is. We're doing some outreach to consumers. We have a couple of healthy home consumers workshops that we've been doing and will continue to do. And we're showing up with booths at events, trade shows, conferences, that sort of thing, trying to do some general outreach and awareness, essentially trying to drum up some business. And we're looking for contractors to get the certification and do the visits. We think that home performance contractors are the best candidates for this because I think you'll see as we go through here that a lot of this stuff is very closely related to what our home performance contractors are already doing. We're going to continue to promote this service. We intend to invest in it, make it grow. We are also intending to set up at least one healthy home evaluator training. So if you want to attend a training, we should be able to offer that to you at a reasonable cost. And similarly, we're trying to expedite the testing, batch things together, work with BPI to set it up, find an appropriate house, and probably help you out on the financing for that as well, although those details are yet to be worked out. We're also working on what we're calling a playbook for contractors, basically some resources that will come in handy to you if you decide to go ahead with this. Step-by-step procedures to follow, checklists that you can use in the house, formats that you can use to report, the appropriate disclaimers, legalese, and that sort of stuff. And as I said, we're looking for qualified contractors, and this will piggyback on what we're already doing with home performance, with BPI, with the Efficiency Excellence Network. So if you're a home performance contractor in Vermont and you're watching this webinar, you are exactly who we're looking for. We're not going to pretend to be doctors, and we'll have to remember that when we're out in the houses. We intend to learn from the medical community, and also the medical community can learn from us too. I can tell you from personal experience, not unusual to find condensation and mold on child's bedroom windows and inquire as to why they're running a humidifier in the bedroom, and finding that their doctor has told them that if their kid has respiratory problems in the winter, they should run a humidifier. Most of us would probably ask the question, what's the relative humidity in that room right now? Most doctors would not ask that question. So I think we can learn from each other, but we do have to be careful not to give the appearance that we are dispensing medical advice. We're basically evaluating the house to see what characteristics the house has, and advising folks to address items that may be unhealthy. In this session, we hope to point out to you that much of what you're already doing in home performance and the way you think of houses as a system is very consistent with the kind of evaluation that we're talking about. A little quick look at how energy efficiency improvements can affect health. Many of the things that we do to make a house healthy are the same things that we might do to make it energy efficient. We also hope you'll gain a better understanding of whether this is an appropriate place for you to go in terms of your business. We'll talk first a little bit about how homes and health intersect. This is not a new thing. This quote from the most famous nurse in history is over 100 years old. So we've recognized for a long time that the spaces we are in have a big effect on our health. We spend an awful lot of time indoors, more than most of us would guess, and that is especially true for the folks who are most at risk, basically the very young, the very old, and those in poor health to begin with. Those are exactly the folks who might spend an awful lot of time, some of them 24/7, in some sort of building. Asthma's on the rise. Most of us have noticed that. Seems to be a lot more around than there used to be, and clearly the places that we live can have a big effect on asthma triggers. A lot of the stuff that we might be identifying in houses is the same stuff that doctors might be looking for when looking for what it is that is triggering these attacks. Lead paint is another item where housing is closely intersected with health. Most of us understand the lead hazard, and most of us know that we have an awful lot of older buildings in Vermont. Something like 70% of our housing stock dates from pre-1980, when they probably have some amount of lead paint on them. Asbestos is another hazard we might encounter in houses. This is a picture of vermiculite. Most of our home performance contractors are very familiar with this stuff. And of course, it's important to know whether you have this in your house. And if you have it in your house, it's important to know what to do, and more importantly, what not to do about it. Radon is another area where housing and health intersect. We have a lot of radon in Vermont. It's scattered around. This map indicates a broad general sense, but this is nowhere near the level of detail that you would need to assess a single house. And in fact, you can never know whether a house has a radon problem or not without testing. So we can certainly characterize buildings in terms of those that might be more likely to have radon problems than others, but a radon evaluation is a good idea for pretty much any home in Vermont. Combustion equipment can be another source of bad indoor air quality in houses, problems for the occupants. And as a home performance contractor, you understand about backdrafting and particulates. And so again, a lot of this stuff is very closely tied to the stuff you're already doing. We're already trying to keep combustion byproducts out of the building. As I said earlier, the folks who are most at risk are generally the very old, the very young, and those that are physically compromised already. And those are the folks that are most likely to be affected by it, even aside from what I mentioned before, that these folks are also the ones who tend to spend the most time indoors. If you look at this chart, you'll see that there's a lot of things that have to do with human health and also have to do with energy efficiency, and a lot of the things that we do in houses are the same things that we might do to address pre-existing health problems. And one of the most obvious examples of this might be moisture, right? We know that if you have a wet basement, that's bad for the house, and it's bad for the people who live in the house. And we know that if we're going to, especially if we're going to air seal the building, it's important to mitigate those moisture sources, to get a cover down on that dirt floor in the basement, that sort of thing. We know that if we can control humidity and we can control surface temperatures, that we can get a good handle on the prevention of mold problems. I mean, mold results from high humidity, which we can do something about, and cold surface temperatures, which we also can do something about. In fact, a lot of our housing stock that needs insulation has mold problems because the indoor surfaces that are exposed to that higher humidity air are cold because they're not insulated as well as they can be. So by insulating a wall, you can make it drier, you can make it less likely to have a mold problem. Some people like to keep the allergens out of the house, and perhaps we're air conditioning or filtering air, keeping the windows closed to keep allergens in certain seasons out of the house. Well, that is destined for failure unless the house is reasonably airtight to begin with, because the windows are the air leaks that the homeowner has control over. But as you know, there's typically a lot of other air leaks that the homeowner doesn't even know about. Pests are another area. Much of the air sealing that we do can prevent pests from entering the house, or at least knock that down. Faulty or inefficient heating systems are something that we try to identify, and we know that They can have an effect on the health of the people in the house. You're already measuring carbon monoxide and several other things that are important in the health of the people who live in the house. In the attic, as you know, there can be some nasty stuff that people shouldn't be ingesting or breathing, and our air sealing helps to keep it out of the house. In the garage, there's tons of stuff that people shouldn't be ingesting, not just the motor vehicles and the carbon monoxide, but the solvents and the pesticides and the various internal combustion engines we have out there with our lawnmowers and our weed whackers and our snowmobiles and motorcycles and everything else. So there's a lot of stuff in a typical garage that shouldn't be in the house, and part of what we do is try to keep it in the garage. Similarly, in the basement, there's a lot of stuff that can come in from the ground and with soil gas, and our work helps to keep that out of the house. And I just mentioned about the outside stuff, pollen, auto fumes, dust. Some of you have probably had the same experience as I have, where after wall insulation job is done, for instance, that old farmhouse where we dense pack the walls, folks will comment that the house doesn't seem as dusty as before, because the road dust that is stirred up by the traffic on the dirt road out in front of the house, that dust doesn't come in the house anymore because there aren't pathways for it to come in. And we know that ventilation is important, and we're doing more and more in ventilation in home performance. And that's probably a good thing, especially as we get houses tighter and tighter. Again, taking the air leakage in and out of the house, the airflow in and out of the house, out of the hands of Mother Nature, and putting that control in the hands of the occupants where it belongs. Air sealing keeps mice out of the house. In 2017, I did a quality assurance inspection on a home performance job in southern Vermont, where the woman had had quite a mouse problem before, and she was very diligent and detailed about how she attacked it. She live trapped the mice, and relocated them. And she kept track in a 3-ring binder of every mouse that she caught and re-released. And she saw the population of mice that she kept trapping continued to go up, and one year it was a few dozen, and then the next year it was 100. And she told me that the year before she had the project done, that she removed over 400 mice from her house over the course of the year. It had been about 6 months from the time the home performance project had been complete and the time of my inspection. And during that time, she had kept her usual complement of mouse traps out, and she had not seen a single mouse. So before the home performance project, 400 plus mice in 1 year, and after the home performance project, 6-month sample, 0 mice. There are 8 principles of healthy housing, and it's, nothing written in stone about these, but it's kind of a good way to organize your thoughts. So we're going to step through these one at a time. Again, this is just to give you a better idea of the kind of things that you might be looking for if you decide to become a healthy home evaluator and offer this as a service. So these are the 8 points. Keep it dry, clean, safe, well-ventilated, pest-free, contaminant-free, well-maintained, and thermally controlled. And we're going to just touch on each of these very briefly. First, keep it dry. You folks know this. How dry or how wet a house runs has a big effect on a lot of things. It has a big effect on the health of the building, the health of the occupants, the durability of the building. The picture on the right is a mold infestation on a drywall ceiling. Kind of ugly. The delightful creature on the left is a dust mite. These things are too small to see, but they live in our houses and sometimes in fairly large numbers. They like high humidity. They especially like things that are warm and relatively damp, let's say above 70% or so relative humidity. So if you can keep your house dry, you generally will not have a dust mite problem. Dust mites, by the way, are allergen triggers. That's one of the main reasons that we're interested in them, not them themselves, typically their feces. And we also are disgusted by them because they like to live, as I say, in places that have a relatively warm and have a high humidity, places like your pillow or your toddler's favorite stuffed toy. Keep it clean. Now you may not have to go to the level that this guy is of wearing a dust mask, but it is true that the cleaner the house is, the healthier it tends to be. Now, you should be clear that this doesn't mean sanitizing and poisoning your way to what you hope to be a healthy house, but it does mean keeping things basically clean. Less surfaces that are attractive to things like mold and mildew and some of the critters that we want to keep out of the house. Keep it safe. This is one area where, maybe as a home performance contractor, you haven't looked that closely, but certainly when we're in someone's house and we're trying to evaluate how safe it is, whether there are hazards in the house makes a difference. And of course, as this photo would imply, what the occupants are like makes a difference. The elderly are susceptible to falls, and they can be, just a simple trip on the edge of a carpet and tumbling to the floor can be absolutely catastrophic for an elderly person. So some of the evaluation is looking at things like that, and some of the things that you folks may already be used to looking at as general contractors, like, is that stairway, that railing, is that safe? Is it actually built the way it should be? Is it sturdy enough? Are the stairs the dimension that they're supposed to be, so you don't fool somebody with a different size stair at the very bottom or the very top? That sort of thing. What's the lighting like? Are the occupants elderly, and are they kind of stumbling their way in half-lit areas, and can we do something about that? Those kinds of things. Keep it well ventilated. We already mentioned that ventilation is important, and that our home performance work already includes a lot of ventilation work. So this is well suited to the skills that you already have. And I think we've already talked about the pests, and if you've spent any time crawling around in basements and attics, you've seen a lot of different pests. We kind of focused on the mice. They're very common, but there's a lot of other critters that might live in houses, and I'll spare you the long list. Keep it contaminant free. We put a lot of poisons in our houses, a lot of things that we don't know what's in them. Some of them we put them in the garage, like this guy is, thinking that they're not in the house, but as you folks know, most attached garages are at least partially in the house in terms of airflow, and that the airflow usually goes from the garage to the house, not in the other direction. So this is probably a good example of how part of this job will be looking around, inspecting, diagnosing, testing, measuring, but a good deal also will be interacting with the homeowner, letting them know about their house, understand some things they didn't understand before, and be better able to manage their own health. Keep it well maintained. This is an example of changing filters, but there are other things in the house that folks should be maintaining and often don't, and this is another area where we as professionals, by looking at what they have for equipment and talking to them, can make sure that they understand how the equipment works, what kind of servicing or maintenance that it needs, so they can keep it running the way it's supposed to be running. Keep it thermally controlled. I mentioned earlier the example of mold growing on a wall because the house is uninsulated and that wall surface runs cold in the winter time and therefore collects trace condensation and becomes a nice place for mold to grow. Every time you install insulation, you change surface temperatures. In general, as we install insulation, we will warm up the temperatures that are inside the thermal envelope. That's good. And generally, the portions of the house that are outside the thermal envelope will start to run cooler. So we need to keep that in mind as well. So we're going to end with just a quick look at what an assessment might look like. I said earlier, a lot of it is looking and testing, but a lot of it is talking to the occupant. a good deal at the beginning. And again, this is consistent with what good energy auditors do. You talk to the client at the beginning to see what they know about their house, what their concerns are, what problems they have that they would like to do something about, and then again at the end to give them the results of your stuff, but also to teach them about their house and the kinds of things that they should be doing to operate it properly, the kinds of things that they shouldn't be doing that maybe that they have. And then, much as you do in a home performance energy audit, you're going to look around. You're going to inspect the exterior, you're going to inspect the interior, look for integrity, look for air leaks and insulation opportunities, the same as you always do, but also look for health hazards and trip and fall hazards and moisture issues as you are already looking. Some diagnostics, probably a healthy home evaluation involves less testing and measuring than an energy audit, but there may still be some. For instance, you might still want to measure carbon monoxide in the building, even if you're there only for a healthy house evaluation and not for an energy audit. Keep in mind, of course, that you might be doing both in the same visit. Because if you can sell someone an energy audit, you can offer them a healthy home assessment at the same time as an adder, and that works pretty well. And then, of course, at the end, you're going to give them recommendations. So just to sum up, as you know, houses are systems, but just as they are systems in terms of energy performance and in terms of comfort, they are also systems in terms of their impact on the health of the occupants. And so looking at the entire thing, a holistic approach where we understand how different things work together and how stuff that may be happening in the basement affects what happens in the living room. By looking at that in detail, we can make the right recommendations to not only make the house more energy efficient, cheaper to heat, more comfortable, but also more healthy. And this is good for the life of your clients. It's also good for you. And if you're anything like me, it just makes you feel good to do something in the house that will remove a hazard from the kids. It's just the right thing to do. And if you decide to go ahead, we're here to help. As I said in the beginning, we're trying to promote this idea. We're working with low-income agencies. We're working with the hospitals. We're working with homeowners. We're trying to get the word out. If you do want to be certified, we can help you out there. And so we'd encourage you to consider it. If you have any other questions about the whole Healthy Home initiative at Efficiency Vermont, probably the best person to contact these days is Laura Capps. Her contact info is here. And we would encourage you to think about this and call us. And as always, at Efficiency Vermont, we're here to help, and we'd be glad to talk to you anytime. Thanks for listening. Bye.